As the sport of arm wrestling has grown, there have been more and more very promising up-and-comers gaining popularity. People like Artem Morozov immediately come to mind. He has made so much progress just in the last couple years, and he is still in his early 20s. Another incredible arm wrestler that is relatively young is Tobias Sperong. Tobias is in his mid-20s, however, the general consensus is that he appears to be around the age of 12 years old. Tobias is absolutely crushing it for a 12-year-old. But there is still one up-and-comer that is even newer to the sport than either of these guys. As far as I know, he has not even had a single super match yet, but he has so much raw power and so much potential. Andrei Smayev is known for breaking the world record for weighted pull-ups. Andrei is doing weighted pull-ups with hundreds of pounds strapped onto his back, and he also has a pretty high body weight on top of that. He is also very strong in bicep curls. Anything that is related to upper body pulling strength, he is elite. This video will cover the potential and the current progress of Andrei Smayev as an arm wrestler. A couple years ago, Devin Larratt uploaded a video titled The Next Russian Superstar. In this video, he talked about Andrei Smayev as well as showcasing some arm wrestling training he was doing. Devin showed a video of Andrei Smayev lifting 100 kilograms on back pressure. 100 kilograms on back pressure is absolutely ridiculous. The highest weight I've ever seen on back pressure is by Denis Saplenkov, who lifted 87.6 kilos for a few reps. So this lift from Andrei would be a huge world record. However, upon further inspection, we see that Andrei is using a 2-to-1 pulley system. This means that even though there was 100 kilos of loaded weight, the true force is closer to 50 kilos, maybe a bit more after accounting for friction. So maybe this was a bit of a false alarm, but 50 kilos is still incredible for a non-arm wrestler, and he was lifting it for multiple reps. Sometime after this, we saw Andrei get involved with Denis Saplenkov. Denis trained Andrei in arm wrestling technique as well as arm wrestling specific training. We saw that Andrei was able to lift 105 kilograms on the seated barbell curl, which is very impressive for a non-arm wrestler. We've seen Andrei doing some pronation training as well. But once Andrei got on the table, we saw exactly what would be expected. Andrei was clearly very strong, he just did not know how to apply his strength on the table. Oftentimes, newer pullers have a very open arm angle and a lack of side pressure. This is exactly what we saw in Andrei. He was trying to engage his lat drag and biceps because those were his strongest areas, but his hand and wrist were nowhere near the level of his lats and biceps, so he ends up cracking his own wrist back and separating himself from his hand quite often. But we see Denis explaining to Andrei that he needs to stay close to the table and that he needs to increase his side pressure. But even in Andrei's first practice, we saw moments where he looked pretty solid. He was able to get a few stops against David Dadakan and some of Denis's other training partners. Now obviously David was not fresh, and he was also pulling slow on purpose. We see that later, if David tries his hardest, he can pin Andrei easily. Regardless, Andrei showed massive potential. Andrei continued to train his weighted pull-ups over the next year, but he also started throwing in some arm wrestling training. We saw his numbers increase in the areas such as pronation and cupping strength, lifts that are more important for arm wrestling. And just a few months ago, we got to see Andrei have another sparring session with Denis Saplenkov, and this time he showed huge improvements. Initially, we see Andrei go up against Denis. In this pull, we see that Andrei is using more of an open top roll lane. Although his technique can obviously be refined more, it looked way better than the last time he pulled Denis. He was now pivoting off of his elbow and engaging his pronation much more naturally. Of course, Denis is way too much because he's Denis, so Andrei trains with Denis's sparring partners. And this showed us a couple things. First, Andrei's open top roll really is pretty effective. We see him able to maintain his pronation, and while his elbow flexor angle is more open than ideal, it's still held strong. Eventually, he is able to roll out and get a pin using this lane. The other thing we see is that Andrei's left arm appears to be his better arm. We also saw him practicing his inside lane with a Kembo. We see that Andrei is able to drive through with side pressure and get a pin. He could certainly be closer to his arm than he is, but he has a much tighter arm angle than on his right. This is allowing him to generate far more side pressure than he did the last time he practiced with Denis's team. On the right arm, we see that Andre's tendency to totally separate from his arm and from the table is still there. This removes his ability to generate side pressure, and Akimbo is able to defeat him on the right arm. Of course, it could also be that Andre was just tired on his right arm, but simply looking at his technique, I think his left arm looks cleaner. So, now that Andre has had another few months to train after a checkup with Dennis, is he ready for his first super match? To me, Andre's situation reminds me a lot of Larry Wheels. At this stage of his career, he is still looking pretty robotic. He can definitely still gain a ton of strength on the table without actually getting stronger, just from further refining his technique. I think Larry has just recently gotten to the place where he really looks like a legit arm wrestler, not just a strong guy who has picked up arm wrestling, but someone who is comfortable on the table. He doesn't need to think through every single move, he just does it automatically. But looking at Andre, for me, I don't think he is at that stage yet. I do think that Andre probably could get a super match if he wanted to. Some of the videos about him have reached over 1 million views, so he probably has enough of a celebrity status to get a match. But I do think it may be a bit early for him. Looking back at Larry, I think he was thrown to the Sharks too soon. There was so much hype around him and so much pressure, but he still wasn't comfortable enough on the table. I would hate to see Andre become focused simply on winning too early in his career, instead of focusing on truly mastering the sport first. This could lead to injury, or at the very least, it could slow his progression overall and teach him bad habits. Larry has been arm wrestling for around 3 years at this point. Andre may have been arm wrestling for a similar amount of time, but it doesn't look like he's had near as much table time as Larry has over that period. So if we are using Larry as a blueprint, I would think that Andre probably needs a bit more time to become a legit arm wrestler. But let me know what you guys think about Andre. Do you think that he is ready for a super match? And if so, who do you want to see him compete against? Personally, I think seeing him go up against Larry Wheels could be a very cool match that would make a lot of sense from a marketing perspective. However, at the moment, I would consider Larry to be the huge favorite, so I think Andre needs a bit more time. But if Andre continues to train and is getting high quality table time, I think that over the next year, he may really start to get the hang of it. I also hope that he fully commits to that open top row lane. I think that because of his amazing bicep strength, his open top row lane probably has the most potential. He simply needs to develop his pronation further and continue to practice. Very excited to see Andre continue to progress in the coming years. It would not surprise me at all if someday we see Andre competing at East vs West or King of the Table. He certainly has amazing potential, but time will tell if he really can be the future of arm wrestling.